Part 6. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 51. It's actually a little lucky egg. This is very rare. Yuto was a little surprised to see the little lucky egg lying on Chiu's body, and quickly came over. This was the first time he had seen such an elf with his own eyes. When the Kadi dog on the side saw Yuto passing by, it also swooped over. Before little Fuden could react, a dog's head rushed in front of him. He was so frightened that he fell back and fell to the ground crying. This cry frightened the Kadi dog into turning around and running back. His hands and feet hurriedly turned over the grass, and quickly ran to Yuto's feet to hide, hiding his head behind him. He looked like a naughty kid who got into trouble. The flying mantis also looked here because of the sound, and the sickle in his hand had already been lifted. Casey looked at Katie calmly, his eyes as calm as water. It's okay. Seeing this, Shiu quickly put down the things in his hands, waved to the two of them, and then picked up the little lucky egg. Don't be afraid, I'm here, be good. Little Fuden gradually regained his composure under Shiu's comfort. Only then did Yuto dare to come over and said apologetically, I'm sorry, the dog is just playful, I didn't want to scare it. After saying that, he grabbed the dog by the back of the neck and dragged it out from behind, and said sternly, quickly apologize to me. Wuakati dog made a very human expression, which made people look very pitiful. Shiu glanced at Yuto and the dejected Kadi dog squatting at his feet, smiled and said, it's okay, little Fuden is more afraid of strangers, he will recognize you after a while. Taking this opportunity, Shiu introduced Yuto and Kadi dog to Fishin Mantis and Casey, and then released the little lucky egg from his arms. Ba. As soon as Shiu let go of little Fuden, Zio Fuden opened his hands and ran towards Shiu, then hugged his hand, as if he was afraid that he would leave. Look how cute the little lucky egg is, Shiu looked at the little lucky egg and smiled. Cute, Yuto nodded, then looked at his silly dog, patted the dog's head and said, look at you. The cute little dog here was immediately knocked back to its original shape, and could only look at the little lucky egg miserably. Shiu couldn't help but laugh when he saw it. It's okay. Little Fuden is also a naughty guy and makes endless troubles, but... Shiu said and took out his favorite snack. Little Fuden, who had been crying and shouting just now, stopped immediately when he saw this. His little eyes were fixed on the snacks in Shiu's hand, and his hands and feet began to crawl up Shiu's body. Shiu played with the little lucky egg with snacks, and Yuto beside him laughed unconsciously. As for the catty dog, he wanted to come over but didn't dare. His aggrieved look made people laugh. Come here. Shiu waved to the Cadillac dog. The dog stood up with its tail. It looked very energetic, but the next second it looked aggrieved. It looked back at Yuto as if he was applying. Go, don't scare it. Yuto looked at it with a helpless smile. Sure enough, the expression on Katie's face was immediately replaced by excitement, and her tail was wagging in the air. Only this time, it learned its lesson and didn't rush over. Instead, it strolled over carefully. Then, while the little lucky egg was attracted by the snack, it twitched its nostrils and sniffed its scent. But Shiu was even bolder and put the little lucky egg directly on the dog's back. Don't be afraid, it won't hurt you, Shiu said softly, while gradually letting go of the little lucky egg. This time, Xiao Fudan, who was eating, was not as excited as before, and he didn't even pay much attention to the dog sitting next to him. On the contrary, the Kadi dog was so frightened that he did not dare to move. And Yuto was a little worried when he saw this, and said, this is a bit dangerous. It's okay, Shiu explained with a smile, little Fuden is actually quite naughty and full of curiosity about everything. As long as he comes into contact with her, he won't be the same as before. Looking over there, Shiu found that little Fuden was pulling the dog's fur curiously, while the dog looked like a mask of pain. Ah, this, You can't do this. Xiu smiled helplessly and could only take the little lucky egg off its back. Okay, you two play. As soon as little Fuden got away from Cotty Dog, he turned away and looked a little scared. But its attitude aroused little Fuden's interest, and he walked toward it with small steps. However, the catty dog ran away in a panic, but after not going far, he couldn't help but turned around curiously, and the two of them turned around. As a little guy, you chased after me, and soon we started playing familiarly. Xiu looked at the two of them playing around and didn't pay any more attention to it, and picked up what he was doing again. Xiu chatted with Yuto while feeding the flying mantis. Xiu discovered that he and Shirley were both still in school. Children in this world started to go to school at about 6 or 7 years old. The first 3 years were equivalent to elementary school. They taught language, culture, and some basic common sense. It didn't matter which school they were in. But when you are 10 years old, you will enter a higher school. There will be schools related to elves and schools not related to elves. Of course, there are huge differences between the two schools, both in terms of tuition fees and teaching content. Most of the students trained by the elf school are trainers or breeders, with professions related to elves. As for the other type of school, it is naturally the other types of social work. But just like what you had learned before, most people can't afford the expensive elf school. That is to say, students' choices are mostly not based on their own preferences, but on their family circumstances. As for Yuto and Shirley, they have such good family conditions, of course they are going to become Pokemon trainers. Xiu asked Yuto about their classes. There was nothing much to say about the first 3 years. After transferring to the new school, the first 2 years were mainly theoretical, supplemented by battles. In the 6th grade, most of them were battles, and there were few theoretical classes. Most of them were some uncommon Pokemon or some special items, or some big people came to give public classes. Similarly, the Alliance requires that you can really get Pokemon after you are 10 years old. It is unprotected and illegal to carry Pokemon under the age of 10. And some people with conditions can get the 3 great Pokemon from the designated location of the Alliance on their 10th birthday. What are the conditions for getting the 3 great Pokemon? Xiu asked Yuto with some curiosity. This is very particular. Yuto had a very strange expression on his face. But he didn't mean to keep it a secret, and then explained the situation. There are 2 situations. One is that the parents themselves have worked for the Alliance for 20 years, and when the child is 10 years old, they can get it for free. The other type is to have excellent grades and sign an agreement to work for the Alliance after graduation, and get opportunities. The second type is generally around the age of 13, and can get the qualification to study at the University of the Alliance. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 52. Obviously, according to what he said, Xiu judged that Sydney should be over 10 years old, and it could be seen from the 2 elves that the 2 of them had little to do with the Alliance. How do you feel about Yuzenjia? Xiu had never seen those 3 kinds of elves with his own eyes, so he couldn't judge the specific situation. I don't know, but there are quite a few people in our school who have this, and we have encountered them in battles, but they are no match for Cotty Dog. Yuto looked at the Cotty Dog playing with little Fuden not far away, with tears on his face. Show a confident smile. Xiu didn't have any reaction when he heard this. The growth potential of Cotty dogs is not bad, otherwise it would not be exclusive to Junsha. Even to a certain extent, it is much more difficult to obtain a Cotty dog than Yuzenjia. I don't know how the director got it. Although Xiu was a little curious, he didn't ask. 2 people have just met, so it's taboo to talk casually. It doesn't matter if you talk about other things, but if this kind of issue involves the privacy of the other party, forget it. The 2 people didn't chat for long before Baoba slowly walked over from the front yard. At this time, Xiu had already fed the elves. This is a little lucky egg. When Baoba saw Xiu's elf, a trace of surprise flashed across his face. As far as he knew, when Xiu left the park, only Casey and the flying mantis should be taken away from the park. In just over a month, he got a little lucky egg from somewhere. It's just that elves like little lucky egg are so rare, it can even be said that only Joey has them, and wild ones basically don't exist. What's wrong, Principal? Seeing Baoba standing in a daze, Xiu asked something strange. It's nothing, Baoba frowned, but soon softened, turned to look at Xiu and asked, "Where did you get your little lucky egg?" "I picked up an egg and hatched it." "Is there anything wrong with it?" Xiu didn't mean to hide it, because there was no need to hide it. He can get elves at the level of Baobalenkoti Dog and Hakran, so they won't be interested in him. For it. Baoba was speechless when he heard this. He didn't know if it was luck or something, but he had nothing to say anyway. After a moment of silence, Baobaba continued, "Elves like little lucky egg are very rare, and they are also subject to some kind of control. If you don't want to get into trouble, it's best not to let too many people know about it." Xiu also understood Baoba's warning, but he asked with some confusion, "What is control?" Baoba glanced at little Fuden not far away, hesitating a little, as if he was trying to form words, and spoke after a few seconds. "How should I put it? Little lucky eggs and their evolved Geely eggs are so rare in the wild that they have almost disappeared. Currently, only Joey has stable breeding. In other words, if this kind of elf appears in people's hands, it will basically flow from Joey, and they have relevant processes and records. Even if it is in the hands of others, it is still supervised and protected by Joey. This is what I call control. But that's not the case for me. Isn't it reasonable for me to not control them if I pick it up in the river? Then the problem is getting more serious." Baoba looked at Xiu with a solemn face. "This not only offends Joey, but also offends Juncha. If they can't find the record, they will judge you for illegally capturing Ziofu in the wild. Eggs, and the protection of endangered elves belongs to Juncha." Ah, Xiu was a little dumbfounded. He didn't do anything, so why did he directly offend these two major forces? Plus, what happened with Obara before? Good guy. Daking Joey, Juncha, and the Alliance were all offended. Then what should I do? Although Xiu was a little surprised, he was far from losing his mind. Since Baoba said so, there must be a solution. Either you hand over the little lucky egg. No. I will never give up on it. Xiu's face turned completely cold, and his eyes revealed evil. Baoba was interrupted by Xiu before he finished speaking. However, he didn't care about Xiu's attitude and just smiled and said the second method. Then the only way is to register the little lucky eggs. You know, even Joey can't control the second generation of lucky eggs. As long as he works hard, he can still find a quota. How much does this cost? Although Baoba did not explain in detail, Xiu also understood what he meant. No, this problem cannot be solved by money. Trainers who can have lucky eggs cannot be short of money, and they will not do such things for money. But I'm short of money. Xiu looked at Baoba with extremely sincere eyes. You don't count. Baoba glanced at Xiu. But just when Baoba was about to explain in detail, there was something wrong with the little lucky egg on the other side. This little guy actually climbed onto the dog's back while playing with it. Compared with the previous situation where he was motionless, this time the catty dog got too excited and started running with it. And little Fuden didn't realize the danger was coming, so the two of them were getting faster and faster, and phantoms were almost appearing around the backyard. Xiu and Bao Bie were chatting about things, not caring about the other side at all. It wasn't until Udo's exclamation that he realized what was going on. Stop it, cutie. You scared little Fuden. It would have been better if he hadn't shouted. The shouting woke up the Growlithe and he braked hard to stop. The Growlithe was able to withstand the strong inertia, but the little lucky egg couldn't catch its strong body, which made it lose control and fly off the Growlithe's back. Xiu and Baoba happened to see this scene. "Kathy, catch the little lucky egg," Xiu shouted hurriedly, and his body subconsciously ran forward. There was another figure faster than him, that was Yuto, who had already rushed out. When Kathy, who had been closing his eyes, heard Xiu's call, he suddenly opened his eyes, raised his hand and grabbed the flying little lucky egg. As his fingers flexed and stretched, a blue light wave spread violently, extending more than 10 meters away. After the light wave touched the flying little lucky egg, it suddenly contracted with it as the center, and wrapped it up, and then it was as if Kathy had tied a rope around the little lucky egg. It stopped its flying and pulled it back. Xiu judged the landing point and opened his hand to catch the little lucky egg. But Yuto, who ran faster than him, missed the position. Xiu held the little lucky egg, and his heart just eased a little. Looking at this little guy again, he was still smiling and excited about something, looking very excited. "You are too naughty," Xiu couldn't help but scold it. But it seemed that the little lucky egg didn't pay attention to him. At this time, the Scyther, who had been away from them and training alone, realized the situation, but it was fine at this time. Xiu gave it a look to comfort it. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 53. Are you okay? Yuto turned around and walked over, the worry on his face had not faded. And Caterpie came over from nowhere, obviously knowing that he almost got into trouble again, and looked depressed. It's okay, don't worry, Xiu said, holding up the little lucky egg. This guy is having fun, and I don't know what will happen. It's good. Yuto was relieved to see that the little lucky egg was okay. When Xiu and Yuto looked at each other, they saw the helplessness on each other's faces, and they laughed for a while. However, these two could laugh, while Baoba behind them had a puzzled look, and there was a hint of fear in his eyes. And his eyes were not on the little lucky egg, but on Casey. Xiu. Maybe we need to talk in detail and bring all the elves. After saying that, Baoba turned and left, without any intention of explaining. Although Xiu was puzzled, he did not pursue it in detail. Instead, he nodded slightly to Yuto and put away the elves and followed. Only Yuto and Caterpie were left in the backyard. Xiu was taken to a place similar to an office with a bookcase, a computer desk, and other equipment. Baobab looked a little serious. After sitting aside, he went straight to the point and asked Xiu, if you don't mind, tell me about Casey. Xiu instantly went over this question several times in his mind, but still couldn't find any clues to the other party's thoughts. He could only bite the bullet and asked back, what does this matter? Don't worry, I'm not interested in it, but you are in trouble now. Baobab glanced at Xiu and said without hesitation. Xiu didn't know what Baobab meant, but he also knew that there was no need to talk nonsense, so he briefly talked about Casey's origin. In other words, it can't teleport. Instead, it is born with telekinesis. That's right, Xiu nodded and admitted it. But Baobab, who got the answer, didn't seem to have any doubts resolved, but his face became even uglier. Even a knowledgeable person like Baobab had never seen such a situation, and didn't know what to say for a while. The scene fell silent. Xiu knew that something must have happened to Casey, but if Baoba didn't say it, he had no choice but to speak up to break the situation and see what he thought. I also know that Casey's situation is different from usual. I wanted to take it to the Pokemon Center for a checkup. Fortunately you didn't go, otherwise the problem would be even more troublesome. Baoba's sinister words interrupted Xiu's words, and he was still muttering something in his mouth. I hope the situation is not what I think. Xiu realized that Baoba seemed to be stuck on some problem, and said, "Director, tell me, I'm not a child anymore." Baoba looked at Chiu with a serious face, and paused for a moment before saying, "Maybe things are not that bad, but I need you to let me check Casey's situation before I can make an accurate judgment." Okay, Chiu agreed without hesitation. Then he let Casey out with his backhand. As soon as Casey came out, he seemed to feel Chiu's strange emotions, and the wonderful feeling of telepathy was touching him. The two were instantly connected, and Chiu shared all the situation just now without hiding anything. It took only a second or two for Casey to understand the situation, and then turned to look at Baobab. However, Baobab did not show any fear of Casey. He also took out a Pokeball, and a Pokemon appeared in the study. "This is Alakazam." Chiu looked at the Pokemon in front of him. It was the first time he had seen it. Compared with Casey, Alakazam had two long beards, his ears became sharper and longer, and his tail was gone. Just like the chest and shoulders were wrapped in brown armor, there were two brown objects on the wrists that looked like wrist guards, the feet became thicker, and there were brown parts on the knees that looked like knee pads, making it look stronger. Chiu saw that this Alakazam had a broad and bright forehead, and it looked like a strong man. However, what surprised Chiu the most was that this Alakazam was different from what he remembered. The thing in its hand was not the spoon in his impression, but a nearly transparent crystal ball. Before Chiu could react more, Casey beside him floated up for some reason and looked at Alakazam on the side. And Alakazam also noticed Casey, but it didn't seem to care too much. "Alakazam, check it for him," Baoba communicated with him, and Alakazam also floated up from the ground, with his legs crossed, and the crystal ball in his hand was suspended in front of him. Chiu could see a pink energy interweaving inside the crystal ball like a thread, and for some reason, a light blue energy suddenly emanated from Casey. Baoba saw this and quickly called Chiu, "Let Casey calm down first, relax a little, and don't resist Alakazam's superpowers." Chiu subconsciously went over to pick up Casey and comforted him, "Don't be afraid, it's just a check." Baoba wanted to call Chiu back, but he didn't expect it to work unexpectedly. Casey stabilized almost immediately, so he didn't care. Chiu, who was holding Casey, could clearly feel Casey trembling, and the connected telepathy allowed Chiu to feel that the superpowers from Alakazam were slowly seeping into Casey's body. "I'm here." Chiu didn't know what the principle was, and he didn't know whether Casey was in pain or afraid. All he could do was stay with it. This step was completed quickly. Alakazam withdrew his spiritual energy. Chiu saw Alakazam looking at Baoba, and then the two seemed to be communicating something with telepathy. Whenever Chiu saw Baoba's doubts and frowns, he was also uneasy. After a long wait, he finally waited until the two finished communicating. Before he asked, Baoba said, "First, we have to do a confrontational experiment. Let your Casey use telekinesis to attack Alakazam. Pay attention to the intensity is to increase slowly until it reaches the maximum." Although Chiu was puzzled, he still did what he said. "Go Casey, be careful." I don't know if it was because he was holding back his anger just now. Casey floated away from Chiu and opened his eyes covered by blue energy. He pushed his hands forward suddenly, and an arc-shaped blue light wave rushed towards Alakazam. Even Chiu, who was standing next to him, could feel a surge of air pressure coming towards him, but Alakazam was still very relaxed, as if he didn't take the oncoming force very seriously. The force reached Alakazam almost instantly, but strangely, Alakazam didn't react at all, and the light wave disappeared in an instant, as if the force just now was just a breeze blowing by. Then he turned around and communicated with Baobab seriously. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 54. This is when Chiu finally reacted, and he hurried over to hug Casey back. "Why are you like this? You don't listen to me." Faced with Chiu's questioning, Casey did not answer, but turned his head to the side and leaned gently on him. Seeing Casey's silence and Baoba who was still communicating, Xiu sat aside helplessly, like a patient's family member waiting for the doctor's diagnosis. After a while, Baoba finally integrated the situation and said, "I know the reason why your Casey is like this for the time being, and I also bring good news and bad news." "Tell me the reason first." Xiu didn't care much about good news and bad news, he just wanted to know the reason why Casey became like this. "Let me first tell you about the normal Casey. We all know that ordinary Casey can teleport as soon as they are born, and they are very skilled. Because Casey has a long growth period, but it cannot learn other skills, so their ability is designed for survival. Next, let me tell you why ordinary Casey cannot learn other skills." Xiu listened for a long time. Baoba roughly meant that ordinary Casey is restricted by its brain, so it cannot use other skills. Casey needs to sleep for 18 hours a day to ensure the development of its brain. It has to wait until it evolves into Yangzhila before its brain is considered to be fully developed and can learn, not learning, but the restrictions are lifted and it can use other skills. The Casey family is born with superpowers. But Xiu's Casey is very strange. It seems that its restrictions are gone, and its brain is inherently larger than ordinary ones, and it develops faster. Ordinary Casey has a limiter, although it cannot use other skills, but it is more suitable for teleportation, which requires fine control of energy. Casey who has lost the limiter cannot use it because he does not have that control, cannot find that feeling, and cannot achieve precise positioning and movement. But it miraculously learned the skill of telekinesis, which is actually the excess dissipation of superpowers. What are the good and bad news? The good news is that your Casey's mental strength and quantity are 3 times stronger than ordinary ones, and its brain is extremely developed, which means that its growth period is shorter than ordinary ones and its strength is stronger. The bad news is that it can't control the superpower. You must know that superpowers are a very scary energy. The energy it accidentally releases will affect the people and elves around it, and this influence is largely negative. If it stays in the group, it is very likely to make other Caseys lose control, just like an infectious disease. This may be the real reason why it was exiled. Speaking of this, Xiu remembered that the gym leader Nancy in Golden City turned people into rag dolls. She seemed to use superpowers. Xiu sorted out his thoughts a little and asked back, in this way, the limiter is actually protecting Casey. Only when it becomes Yangzhila can it control this power. You can say that, but I don't know the details. So the director is so anxious to let me come up because I have been affected. Xiu was silent for a moment and then said what Baoba didn't say. That's right, Baobab looked at Xiu and said in a serious tone, Alakazam did find residual superpowers in you just now, which means you have been affected. The reason why Baobab didn't say it directly just now was because he was afraid that Xiu couldn't accept it. When he said this, he was already prepared to deal with Xiu's emotions. But what he didn't expect was that Xiu just nodded silently after hearing this and fell into silence without much reaction. What will happen if this kind of influence occurs? Xiu woke up from silence. Mutation, tumor, cancer, or growing another leg or hand, anyway, everything is possible, and the worst case is death. Does the director have any suggestions? How to solve this problem? My suggestion, Baobab said in a long tone, looking at Casey beside Xiu. The meaning is self-evident. This won't work. Xiu shook his head and stretched out his hand to block Casey behind him. Are there any other ways? This is the simplest and most effective. Otherwise, do you think its parents haven't thought of other ways? Let me tell you, Alakazam's IQ is higher than humans, and its sociality is no worse than humans. They cherish their companions very much. They will not exile it unless there is really no other way. Baoba found Xiu so calm and said it directly, but Xiu still didn't agree. I have my own code of conduct. Since I promised, I won't give up on it. Xiu's face was expressionless, and his tone was extremely calm, like a robot. Casey's meaning to him is not just the first Pokemon, but it contains his love for Pokemon in his previous life, and it is a bridge connecting him and this world. And he can feel Casey's feelings for him. Every time they telepathically communicate, they will reveal the feelings of both parties. Their relationship is that of partners, companions who are going to adventure together, not tools that can be discarded at will. What's more, he has died once, and his fear of death is very weak, or even non-existent. Baobab could only sigh when he heard what Xiu said, and then he talked about the problem just now. Do you know why I just said that it was a good thing that you didn't go to the Pokemon Center for a checkup? Because if the Pokemon Center finds out, they will definitely detain Casey and deal with her, and you have no ability to resist. This situation not only affects you, but the uncontrolled superpowers that escape from Casey will also affect the surroundings. This is not just your business. After hearing this, Xiu realized that he had taken it for granted. He could not care about his own life, but it was a bit too much to involve innocent people. Seeing Baoba fall silent, Xiu also knew that he was a bit embarrassed. That's the only way. Xiu whispered something, and released Scyther and Little Lucky Egg. Scyther was a little nervous when he suddenly appeared in such a space, but Little Lucky Egg didn't change much. Now there are some situations that I need to tell you. Xiu briefly summarized the situation just now and told Scyther. Then Xiu looked at Baoba and asked, please help the two of them check to see if they are affected, or to what extent. Baoba didn't waste any words, and got the result after a moment. You guessed right, Baoba's expression softened. They all have residual superpowers, but the elves are highly resistant, so the impact is very minor, so there is basically no problem. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 55. Xiu smiled when he heard this and said, this is a rare piece of good news. It was hard for Baoba to understand why Xiu could still laugh, especially when he heard what happened next, and was even more shocked. If possible, please ask the director to help me take care of them both. Xiu stood up and bent towards Baoba sincerely. This frightened him, and he quickly stood up and moved forward to support Xiu. Even Hu Di, who was beside Baoba and ignored the world, looked a little surprised and looked straight at Xiu. No, no, no. Just wait a moment. Baoba lifted Xiu up and said helplessly, what are you doing? As the principal said, this is not just my problem, I always have to take care of other people's feelings, Xiu explained with a wry smile. My ignorance has already implicated the two of them before, and if this continues it will hurt them. What's more, they all have very good qualifications and should enjoy better breeding conditions. However, they have endured hardships while following me, which is also bad luck. It would be better to separate here. As for Kathy's matter, I have responsibility, so I must shoulder it. I believe there must be a solution to this. The flying mantis is not as smart as Casey, so it took him a while to figure things out, but the words Xiu said here made him confused again. What is going on? Why are they separated? For a moment, the flying mantis became confused and showed a very irritable state. Different parts of its body seemed to have independent consciousness and moved uncontrollably. Out of its instinct, the flying mantis subconsciously identified Baoba and Hu Di as enemies, and its obvious hostility was immediately revealed. Fortunately, Xiu also noticed its condition and quickly calmed it down. Okay, Xiu raised his hand and put it on Fission Mantis's shoulder. This has nothing to do with the director, it is my own decision. Xiu connected telepathically with the flying mantis and explained the situation in a few simple words. The flying mantis also stayed at this time. Just the next second, Xiu felt a strong emotion rushing into his brain. It was the flying mantis. So now, while you two are not greatly affected, leave me and Casey first, otherwise the situation will get worse if it drags on. Xiu finished speaking, but the flying mantis had no intention of leaving. You promised to let me stay. You said we would work together. You said we would stick together. The strong emotions of the flying mantis impacted Xiu's brain through telepathy, and Xiu's own image was retransmitted to his mind through the flying mantis perspective. At this time, the side effects of telepathy were revealed. The large amount of information and emotional interaction in a short period of time caused Xiu's mental state to decline rapidly. The situation has changed now. Staying will only bring harm to you. Xiu's face became haggard at a speed visible to the naked eye, but he still smiled and said to the flying mantis, "Forgive me." At the same time, he stretched out his hand to touch the flying mantis. However, flying mantis did not accept such an apology and took a step back to avoid Xiu's hand. There was also a hint of unknown emotion in the eyes that looked at Xiu, like anger or fear. "That's it," a voice interrupted the conversation between them, as if it was ringing in their minds. On the side, Casey slowly floated up and conveyed through telepathy, "You don't have to do this, this is my business, I will leave." Xiu Na's smiling face immediately fell down. He turned to look at Casey and said sternly, "I am the boss, listen to me." But the next second he switched back to telepathy. "I have my own discretion in this matter. Don't worry, you all have to listen to me. You should know that me leaving is the best solution, and you taught us to choose the optimal solution." Casey did not waver in any way because of Xiu's words, he still looked calm. "Are you leaving?" Xiu was a little excited, completely losing the calmness he had at the beginning. "What can you do after you leave? Wait to die?" Xiu waved his hand slightly irritably, then walked up to the flying mantis and reached out to grab its shoulder. "Listen. Casey can't be alone in his current situation. I have to stay with him. But you and Xiao Fuden will still have a bright future even if they leave us. Don't worry about us too. Trust my ability. And, help me take good care of the little lucky egg." After saying that, Xiu turned around, picked up the little lucky egg, and forced it onto the flying mantis. As for the flying mantis, he didn't even react yet, so he had to hurriedly bend his arms and point the blade outward, temporarily hugging the little lucky egg. But the panic it showed became more intense. And Casey didn't mean to argue. He actually got up and flew out of the window while Xiu was explaining to the flying mantis. By the time Xiu reacted, it had flown out of the window. "Hey," Xiu cursed secretly when he saw this, and hurriedly leaned down by the window and shouted at it, "Come back. Listen to me on this matter." But Casey ignored his meaning and drifted further away. Xiu looked at the retreating figure, his eyes narrowed slightly, and the expression on his face faded. He actually climbed up to the window and shouted to Casey, "Casey, catch me." After saying that, he immediately jumped outside. At this time, even Baobabo behind him jumped up from his position, his eyes widened. He had never seen such a madman. The second-floor window was only 4 or 5 meters above the ground. Xiu had just jumped out and felt like he had stepped on the ground before he even felt the falling sensation. And Casey, who had just flown out, was floating in front of him. "Aren't you afraid that I won't come back?" Xiu stood in the air like this, with the corners of his mouth raised, and said confidently, "Because I know you will catch me." Feeling the attitude conveyed by Xiu, Casey said helplessly, "This is unfair to them. Leaving alone is the best solution. I know the consequences of all choices better than you do," Xiu said sternly to Casey, "or do you think you are great? Will we be very happy after you leave?" Casey fell into silence, but Xiu kept talking. "You need me more than they do. Please believe me, I will find a way to solve your problem. There is no absolute dead end in this world. Humans have different methods and ideas than elves. But you will die." Casey looked at Xiu, her eyes dim, as if to penetrate Xiu's heart. "Oh. Who wouldn't die?" Xiu said with a nonchalant look on his face. "I've already died once, do you think I'd be scared?" You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 56. Okay. You guys come in first. Baoba, who was standing by the window, looked at them with a strange expression. This matter has not reached that point yet. Although Baoba did not access the telepathy between them, he could also capture the strong emotional fluctuations and body movements of the two. And Chiu's increasingly worse condition. He also roughly understood their current situation. Chiu and Casey looked at each other, and then both returned to the office. Baoba returned to his seat, sorted himself out a bit before speaking. Based on the information we have now, Casey's problem is that he lost control of his superpowers because of a lack of some mechanism, which caused him to lose precise control of his superpowers, causing the superpowers to leak out and affect the surroundings. Then we just need to find a way to suppress the leakage of this energy to temporarily delay the impact and buy you more time to solve the root of this problem. Does the director have any way to help Casey control his power? Its current situation is very rare, at least I have never encountered it, and I am not a professional researcher in this area, so let me first explain my thoughts to you, not from the perspective of the limiter, but from the experience of Alakazam and I over the years. A little control experience summed up. As Baoba spoke, Chiu felt the touch of telepathy. Connecting forward is a feeling different from Casey's, more stable and, Chiu doesn't know how to describe it. Anyway, it is more real, and the degree of distortion will not be so high. And Chiu looks like he is standing there stupidly from the outside, but in fact a large amount of data is constantly pouring into his brain. Casey on the side also seemed to have crashed, floating in the air motionlessly. After a while, Baoba spoke. This is my idea. Through training, Casey will enhance his control over superpowers. At the same time, I will prepare some medicine for you and your elves to reduce the impact on you. Xiu was still reading the information and didn't react much to Baoba's words. Of course, this is only a temporary measure. To really solve this problem, we still need more professional people, people who are more professional with elves. Xiu only reacted slightly after hearing this. I heard the director say that there is a candidate. In Kanto, even in the world, no one can compare to Okiyuki in the study of elves. Xiu was stunned when he heard the name. He was not unfamiliar with this name, even too familiar. The man who occupies a certain position in both games and animations, especially in animations, is even teased by many people as the father of the protagonist, the silly thing. Director, it should be difficult to contact such a well-known person. But do you have a choice now? Baoba seemed very casual. Indeed. Xiu fell silent and began to think about the feasibility of this plan. But just as Baoba said, he had no choice at all. Anyway, I have found the direction. I will go to see Professor Oak. After a brief thought, Xiu sorted out the situation and knew how to deal with it. It must be said that without Baoba's guidance, he would not have found the direction so quickly. Xiu turned his head to look at Scyther and little Lucky Egg beside him, frowning slightly. Like you said, can they let you go after you leave? It's better to take them with you, at least everyone can take care of you. And you have to learn to trust them. Seeing Xiu's reaction, Baoba guessed what he was thinking and couldn't help but admonish him. I know this. Xiu's answer seemed a bit perfunctory. He turned his head to look at Scyther and said in a deep voice, this is the situation now. Continuing to follow me will definitely affect you. You decide. Scyther took a step forward, and its meaning was self-evident. Okay, Xiu closed his eyes and calmed down his emotions a little, then nodded in response. After a brief exchange, Xiu put them all back into the pokeball, then looked at Baoba and asked, does the headmaster have anything to say? Hearing this, Baoba did not show any change in his expression, but picked up the pokeball like Xiu and took back Alakazam beside him, and then spoke slowly. Originally, there was indeed something I wanted to ask you, but now it seems that it is not possible. Xiu did not intend to talk, just listened. Baoba continued to talk to himself. You should know that Yuto will graduate soon. Compared to going to those Pokemon trainer universities, he is more willing to travel and collect badges to participate in the league competition, and I respect his decision. Xiu whispered in agreement, but he still did not seem to want to take over the topic. He can take care of himself and has the ability to live outside. Baoba leaned back on the chair and looked at Xiu. But the problem is, he is straightforward and doesn't know how to adapt, and he has a strong sense of justice, which often offends people. I can still help him in Qianhong City, but it won't work outside. People won't care about your identity. So I need someone who is stable, quick-witted, and trustworthy to help me watch him, and you are a perfect fit. Xiu was not surprised to hear this, as if he had guessed it long ago. So that's why the headmaster mentioned the problem with Xiao Fuden. Then you underestimate me too much. Baoba grinned. This is just a gift for meeting, I will definitely give you a satisfactory reward. And whether as a breeder or a trainer, traveling is also very beneficial to you. But now that Casey has happened, it is impossible, isn't it? Xiu's face looked a little solemn. No wonder Baoba has been paying so much attention to him since the inspection center. I'm afraid he has already been considered when he was in the park. But this also explains his previous doubts. Forget it. Baoba shook his head and said in a teasing tone, I find that you are also stubborn. I dare not imagine what will happen after you two get together. Xiu just smiled foolishly and didn't respond. Even if there was no Casey, he would never agree to Baoba to act as his eyeliner to watch Yuto. Just look at Xiaogang and you will know. He has to take care of people and clean up the stupid thing. He has to take care of danger. He is a real nanny and bodyguard. Damn. It would have been fine if he had been a grandson his entire life, but now he isn't even a grandson anymore. He has to be his grandson's babysitter, which lowers his status even more. Whoever wants to do it can do it, but he won't do it. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 57. Forget it, I will find someone else to deal with Yuto. Baoba didn't seem to want to continue this topic, but Xiu didn't think so. What the director is doing is not of any benefit to Yuto. He must experience some things in order to grow. If you arrange for people to accompany him to watch him, this trip will have no effect. This matter has nothing to do with Xiu, but it does not prevent him from being a dog-headed strategist. What should I say? Baoba seemed to realize that Xiu had something to say. Perhaps we can start with his character and create some troubles on his travels so that Yuto can suffer a little, feel the malice of society, and polish his character. What's more important is that the trouble is controllable and will only make him suffer without danger. It's interesting, please elaborate. Baoba became a little interested after listening to Xiu's words. Well, Xiu was just joking, but he didn't expect Baoba to take it seriously. Fortunately, his mind moved quickly and he came up with a plan in a few seconds. Director, you said he has a strong sense of justice. Then I know one thing. Maybe I can teach him a lesson. There is a breeding house in the south of the city that specializes in pets. Xiu told him his plan, but when he finished, Baoba turned his head and looked at him with a strange look in his eyes. You don't have any grudge against you, do you? When Xiu heard this, he didn't care at all. Instead, he smiled and said, Yuto and I just met. How can we have any grudge? Although this is a bit exaggerated, the effect is obvious, isn't it? And it's just a breeding house. I believe the director's ability to control risks. Xiu added another sentence as he spoke. The director pointed out the way for me, so I'll just give you some suggestions. Baoba smiled when he heard this, reached out and opened the drawer on his desk, took out a beautifully shaped square box, opened it, and pushed it towards Xiu. "Take it." Xiu looked over and found that there was an elf ball with a strange icon in the brocade box, which felt a little strange for a moment. "What does this mean, Principal?" "This is the elf ball I customized from Silver Company. Each one costs upwards of 100,000 yuan. Of course, the function and quality are worthy of the price. The cheap goods you have can't stop Casey from escaping superpower, but this can isolate the influence to a certain extent. There are so many other explanations for the elf ball." Hearing this, Xiuke stopped feeling sleepy and picked up the elf ball to play with. But what he was a little bit curious about was what happened to the mark on it. "Director, what does the symbol on the elf ball mean? Does it have any special function?" After taking a look, Baobaba explained, "It's just a status symbol. Many people like to add a special mark on the customized elf ball. For example, this logo means that this is my elf ball." Speaking of this, Baoba also casually taught Chiuke some things about the elf ball. Our park also customized field balls and commemorative balls from Silver Company. The cost of these two types of balls are different. Those commemorative balls are similar to ordinary red and white balls, both in terms of function and cost, but the outer coating is different. Changes, but with the commemorative meaning, the price has increased significantly, and the original red and white ball can be sold for 300 to 500. Having said this, Baoba smiled and asked back. "The cost of making field balls is not cheap, but we sell them for 101. Do you know why?" "I don't know." Xiu shook his head honestly. He really didn't know this. "The cost is high because the wild balls have detection and positioning functions. We have registered most of the elves in the park, especially the rare ones. So if an elf is admitted to the wild ball, the park will be able to know the status and capture location of the elf in the ball immediately. Otherwise, how do you think we can control those people in the park?" "Oh, I understand. Also, the field ball is set as a one-time use. If it fails for the first time, it will lose its effect. Moreover, this kind of ball can only be used in the park. Outside the park, even the red and white balls are inferior. When buying tickets, we will tell those guys about field ball. When those trainers leave the park, no one will keep this, and they will all replace it with their own poke balls. At this time, the used balls are recycled at half price, and the unused ones are sold at full price." After listening to what Baoba said, Xiu immediately understood why he was able to save all this wealth. It would be a pity not to work as a planner at Penguin. He has been around in it and knows that this rule is not as simple as Baoba said. There is also some hidden information in it. That is why the park cannot be conquered through fighting. One is to ensure the safety of tourists, and the second is to force trainers to buy more tickets. Because throwing the ball casually is almost useless, after all, they can adjust the capture ratio of the field ball. If you want to take away the elf you like from the park, you can only communicate with the elf frequently. Having a foundation will only reduce the elf's resistance. Just like how he took away the flying mantis. However, this is a bit illegal. After all, the park stipulates that employees cannot have frequent contact with elves. Now it's good that Baoba doesn't pursue it. But unlike Xiu's worries, Baobaba had no intention of stopping. Also, don't use unclear poke balls, or else people will sell your Pokemon data, and there will be some disgusting positioning issues. There are many details about Pokeballs, and some of them cannot be explained in a short time. Of course, more importantly, don't hand your Pokeballs to others casually. I have seen many novices being deceived." Hearing this, Xiu suddenly remembered the stupid guy in the animation. He seemed to have handed the Pokeballs to others carelessly many times. Fortunately, Team Rocket was also our own people, otherwise it might be gone. "Don't worry, Principal, I won't make such a low-level mistake. Xiu is not stupid, why would he give the pokeball to others for no reason? But he didn't expect that there are so many knowledge about pokeballs, neither the game nor the animation mentioned these. The two chatted and the topic went further and further, from trainers to breeders, and talked about many strange topics. Alas, it's been a long time since I chatted with others like this. Baoba sighed. Yuto has been very smart since he was a child, but he is too respectful and will never question my words. He is like a subordinate, not like a grandfather and grandson at all, and Shirley and I rarely talk, let alone so many topics to talk about. Everyone has troubles, at least the director doesn't need to worry about the next meal like me. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 58. Let's do this. You stay for a few days. At least you need to stabilize Casey's condition first. Otherwise, I won't dare to let you go. After all, I also have responsibilities. Understood. Xiu nodded in agreement, then asked, I didn't expect that the director of the garden is actually related to Juncha. Juncha's headquarters is near Qianhong City, and the people who want to hang out here are more or less related to Juncha. Although Baoba did not explain in detail, Xiu could still guess that Baoba's status within Juncha was definitely not low. After all, most people would not be so casual when talking about Juncha. Then go ahead. I'll ask Yato to clean up a room for you later. No need, I'll just go camp in the backyard so as not to make any noise and disturb you. Although Baoba didn't care so much, Xiu knew that he was in trouble, so it would be better to have less contact with Yato and the others. There won't be any problem with short-term contact, since Casey spends most of his time in the Pokeball. What's more, not to mention Yato, even Shirley's physical fitness is much better than yours. When Xiu heard this, he smiled bitterly and shook his head. His hands tightened unconsciously, feeling his thin body. They have had enough to eat and drink, and have eaten nutritious meals until this time. When Xiu was in the orphanage, let alone nutrition, even having enough to eat was a luxury. If he persisted in chewing garbage to this extent, his foundation was already poor. It had only been more than 2 months since I escaped from there. How could I recover in such a short time? However, this also reminded Xiu of some problems in disguise. Since Baoba had no objection, Xiu didn't need to cause trouble for himself. He agreed and left the office. But what he didn't expect was that as soon as he went out, he met Yatu walking towards him. What happened just now? It's okay, it's just that I didn't take good care of my elf, and that's why I made a joke. It's okay, it's okay. I was afraid it was the dog that caused the trouble just now. Yato's expression softened a lot after hearing this. And seeing Yato's concerned look on his face, Xiu suddenly felt that he had gone a little too far. No, this is training him. Xiu quickly confirmed his idea, looked at Yato with a scrutinizing look, and then nodded slightly. What's wrong with me? I think you have a lot of room for improvement. Clam. Yuduo listened to Xiu's strange remarks and couldn't even understand the meaning for a while. But at this time, Baoba walked out of the room and shouted in their direction. Yato, go and clean up the guest room for repairs. He will stay here for a few days. Okay, Yudo seemed a little excited when he heard this. He turned to Xiu and said enthusiastically, let's go, I will take you to the guest room. In the early morning, several people were sitting around the dining table, and Baoba was explaining something to them. I have to deal with some things later, Yato, please remember to send Shirley back to school. After talking a lot, the topic finally came to Xiu. As for Xiu, just stay at home for now. I will bring you the things you need tonight. Yes, Xiu nodded silently without saying anything else. They all left soon, leaving only Xiu alone. After Xiu finished cleaning up, he came to the living room. Looking at the empty environment in front of him, he was slightly stunned for a moment. Before going to bed, he rehearsed yesterday's situation and conducted a large amount of analysis on what Baoba pointed out. The current situation is that Casey's ability to control himself has weakened due to unknown reasons, causing the leakage of superpowers. To put it simply, Casey is now a walking source of radiation, and long-term exposure will definitely cause effects. As for the plans given by Baoba, Xiu took out the new elf ball, thought for a moment, then got up and walked out. After releasing the elf from the ball, Xiu took the opportunity of breakfast to analyze the situation for them, and then gave them his modified training plan. Chief among them is a change in Casey's training regimen. Okay, Flying Mantis, you can go train yourself first. The Flying Mantis was arranged here, and then Xiu looked at Casey. Let's not rush to start the training programs given by the principal. Let's test and judge first and get rough data. Xiu exchanged his thoughts with it last night, then picked a leaf from the nearby tree and said to Casey, try to let it float in the air. Casey used his superpower to control the leaves, causing them to break away from Xiu's hands and float in the air. Okay, Xiu took out a long ruler, assigned a position, and continued, let the leaves rise here. Casey made the leaves rise easily, but after having a reference object, he also discovered a little problem. Xiu looked at the data on the ruler and whispered, come again. As the number of times stacked up, Xiu roughly judged that the error was 1 to 2 centimeters. This is what Baoba calls low control. It fails to fully control its own power. But this data was not enough. Xiu then went outside to find a fist-sized stone, placed it on the ground, and said to Casey, let the stone rise. Casey's understanding ability was comparable to that of ordinary people, and it was easy to understand what he meant. Then he naturally followed Xiu's words and easily used his superpower to pick up the stone. After many measurements, Xiu found that the error when Casey carried stones was about the same as that of leaves. Then Xiu used a similar method to measure the range of Casey's telekinesis. Let Casey control the object to move away from him. Finally, it was found that the leaves could be stably controlled within 10 meters, and the stones could be controlled within 7 meters, and the error increased the farther away. During the experiment, the biggest difference between stones and leaves is that stones are heavy, and the more energy is consumed to control the heavier objects. After getting these data, he customized the training content for Casey. The training content is different from before, mainly to enhance the control. Xiu said, taking out the props prepared last night. An empty bottle, and a handful of rice. Xiu unscrewed the bottle and opened it 5 meters away from Casey, and then put the rice on the other side. Pick up the grains and put them in the bottle one by one, don't touch the bottle mouth. Casey used his superpowers to pick up the rice grains at will, and then moved them into the bottle. This process was very easy. However, Xiu screwed the bottle cap back on the next second, revealing a hole on it that was not much bigger than a grain of rice. Continue. It was still the same relaxed beginning, but this time the grain of rice was trembling in front of the hole and just couldn't get in. That's it, your training time today is 6 hours. Xiu nodded slightly when he saw the effect. The distance and size he chose were based on what he had just done, and he would have to judge Casey's effect based on those data later. Casey was not affected by his words, and the grain of rice was still trembling at the mouth of the bottle. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 59. You are indeed here. Grandpa hasn't come back yet. Yuto walked into the backyard and saw Xiu playing with something, so he asked curiously. What are you doing? Xiu looked back and explained casually, this is a training device I made for Casey. Of course, it's a little childish. Listening to Xiu's somewhat self-deprecating tone, Yuto showed great interest and asked more questions. Tell me first what the principle is. Seeing him like this, Xiu could only give a brief explanation. This device is mainly to exercise Casey's control. The structure is very simple. It is just two wires twisted into two wires. There is a certain distance between the two wires. The training content is that Casey controls the object from beginning to end, without touching the wire. As he said this, Xiu took out a pen and started playing with it while explaining. It's just that Xiu didn't advance much before he hit the wire and failed. You see, these bends, right angles, and waves are all difficult points, and the spacing is adjustable. When it is narrow to a certain extent, it will be difficult even when you are holding this pen. Xiu, you are really a genius. How did you come up with such an interesting training device? Yuto showed great interest after hearing this. I've seen other people play this kind of little game before, but now I'm playing it on the elf. Xiu didn't say anything more and handed over the pen in his hand. This is not fun. You'll know after you try it. Yuto excitedly took the pen and started playing on it, but just like Xiu said, this little game is not as simple as it seems. Sometimes he even touches the edge of the wire before reaching the corners. Ah, why did we meet again? Xiu watched Yuto having a great time and just stood aside and smiled. But suddenly he seemed to feel something. Xiu turned his head and looked behind him, and saw Shirley, who had come back at some point and was looking over there. When Xiu looked over, she had already turned around and returned to the house. Xiu didn't pay much attention to this, he just created an optimized version in his mind based on Yuto's experience. The difficulty is still too low. Not long after playing here, a red light suddenly appeared on Yuto's body, and the figure of Kati appeared next to him. When Yuto saw this, he stopped playing the little game and said with some annoyance, "By the way, I still want to train with you." Saying this, Yuto turned to look at Xiu. "We'll play later. I'm going to train with Katie." Xiu was a little curious when he heard this, and asked, "Where did you go to train? Is there a place nearby with few or no people?" He couldn't just focus on Casey, he also had to take into consideration the training of Flying Mantis, and as a villa area, it was difficult to find a suitable place. 5 kilometers east of this area is the suburbs. There are usually no people there. Yuto roughly pointed out the direction en route. But the Kati dog beside him seemed a little impatient and nudged his lower back with his head, as if urging him. Okay, let's go right away." Here Yuto smiled helplessly at Xiu, and then took the dog out of the house. "I didn't expect the trainer to still want to walk the dog." Xiu murmured, then sat down again and continued optimizing the device. But soon he felt the feeling of being spied on again. Looking up, Shirley came to the backyard at some point, with Vulpix following her. "Hello, Miss Shirley." Xiu didn't know what she was going to do, so he just greeted her politely and continued his work. Instead, Shirley walked up to Xiu Shen, squatted down and looked at the thing in his hand and asked, "What are you doing?" Xiu was a little surprised that she was interested in this, but it didn't matter, and he repeated what he just said to Yuto. However, she was not as excited as Yuto at this time, but seemed to lack interest. "Aren't you a breeder? Why are you still doing this?" "I'm not a breeder either. I just took the certificate when I had time." If Xiu said these words to those candidates, he might be killed. "So are you a trainer?" After listening to Shirley's words, Xiu looked at her curiously and asked, "Miss Shirley, is there anything you need my help with?" Shirley, who had been repaired a little bit, didn't talk nonsense, but asked directly. Do you know how to fight?" "I don't know much about this. I have never fought against him." Xiu became alert when he heard this and denied it casually. "But brother said that your elves are all very strong." "Nurturing and fighting are two different things, just like eating and going to school. Eating more does not necessarily mean good grades. Moreover, Yuto has learned how to fight in school, so he is definitely better than me." Who knew that? When Shirley heard this, she blurted out. He won't help me. Hearing the slightly resentful tone, Xiu suddenly had a headache. If he doesn't even help his brother, there must be something wrong here, so he can only pretend to be stupid and say nothing. Forget it. Shirley stood up and left when Xiu didn't say anything. She had no intention of forcing him. Just when I thought I could feel more at ease, a high-pitched voice came. Brother Yuto. Xiu frowned when he heard this, got up and walked to the front yard. At this time, Baobaba hadn't come back yet, and Yuto went out to walk the dog again, so he should have to deal with this. As soon as he walked out to the front yard, he saw Shirley's strange expression. Before Xiu could ask about the newcomer, the door was opened and a girl about the same age as Shirley walked in. She was accompanied by an Evie. This immediately attracted Xiu's attention. He was about to observe carefully, but the little girl spoke first. Who are you? I am. Xiu was about to introduce himself, but he didn't expect the little girl to smile strangely, raised her finger and pointed at him and shouted. Thief. Huh, Xiu was stunned. The little girl didn't mean to let him go, and actually ordered Evie directly. Come on, catch this thief. And Evie didn't mean to hesitate. He jumped forward, and the sharp claws popped out of his hands. His face had long lost the leisure just now, but instead had a hint of hunting coldness. Xiu was not a fool, although he didn't expect this person to dare to take action here directly. But no matter how fast Evie was, the distance between them was enough for Xiu to react. One hand directly pressed on the pokeball on his body, and Casey would come out in the next second. At this moment, Vulpix suddenly rushed out and blocked Zacian. Evie saw that Vulpix blocked Zacian but did not intend to stop, but changed direction and rushed towards Vulpix. Vulpix seemed a little afraid of Evie, who was bigger than himself and more aggressive. Adventurer of the Elf World. Author, Wu Nangkuang Song. Chapter 60. Just when Ibrahimovic was about to touch Vulpix, Shirley ran over at the same time, with undisguised anger on her face. This is my guest. When the girl heard this, the smile on her face did not weaken at all. Instead, she smiled even brighter and said casually. It's just a joke, Shirley, why are you so nervous? The girl shifted her gaze from Shirley to Vulpix, and said something with a smile. Come back. Ibrahimovic paused for a moment, then turned around and jumped back to the girl. It was only then that the girl raised her head and glanced at Xiu, but her eyes showed an obvious casualness, like looking at the weeds on the street. After just one glance, he looked away again and said to Shirley, Where is Brother Yuto? He's not here, Shirley said with obvious disgust in her tone. You should leave quickly. What about Grandpa Baoba? The girl had no intention of leaving, but instead came closer. What does it have to do with you? Don't come over and disturb my study. Study. The girl's smile became even brighter when she heard this, and she mocked in a sinister manner, Do you want me to teach you? After all, your grades. When Shirley heard this, her expression turned strange. She clenched her fists and looked at the visitor with wide eyes. But the girl didn't get too close, and instead walked towards Xiu. Is this your new gardener? He looks good. The girl walked around Xiu, made some comments, and finally looked at Shirley and said, Are you interested in coming to work at my house? When Shirley heard this, her blood pressure soared with anger, and the veins on her neck popped out. The two people were talking about something there, most of which was the girl mocking Shirley. Listening to the conversation between them, Xiu felt that she was deliberately irritating Shirley, but no matter what she said, Shirley would not be fooled. Except for a few strange words, most of the time she was cold-faced. But Evie was constantly harassing Vulpix. You are welcome to come to my house as a guest. After the girl showed off for a while, she finally left, leaving only Shirley, who was still angry, and Vulpix, who looked a little aggrieved. As for Xiu, there was still no unnecessary expression on his face. Instead, he slowly lowered his hand, turned to look at Shirley, and said leisurely, "Is she the one you want to defeat?" Shirley turned to look at Chiu, and then remembered that there was another person, but at this time she had no more thoughts, so she opened her mouth and said to him, "That's right." Hearing the anger in Chiu's tone, a slight smile actually appeared on Chiu's face. "Can you tell me about her? Maybe I can help you." Shirley was stunned for a moment. "Didn't you just say that you were too busy? Why are you talking about this again?" However, she just lacked a way to vent her anger, so she filled her description of that person with all the resentment she had just accumulated. "She is real." After listening for a while, Xiu finally understood the little girl's situation. Her name is Chana, and her family is also near this area. The elders of her family are familiar with Baoba, and they can be said to be family friends to some extent. The three of them often played together when they were children, but usually it was Kana and Yuto who played together, and Shirley just used to make up the numbers. Moreover, this Kana has been particularly fond of bullying Shirley since she was a child, and even more so after getting the elf. "This person is really annoying." Xiu said something casually, and Shirley took the words as if she had found a companion. "You think she's annoying too, right?" Xiu smiled and nodded, then looked at Shirley and asked, "Have you told your brother or the principal? This guy acts like a good girl whether in front of her own family or her grandfather. Even if I tell them, they won't believe me at all." With that said, Shirley complained about Yuto to Xiu. "And my brother has listened to her and will follow her to bully me." Xiu could only look a little helpless when listening to Shirley's complaints. When she talked about it, he even echoed a few times and participated in the crusade. "So you want to defeat her in a battle, right?" As the topic went on and on, she didn't know where it had strayed. Xiu could only interrupt her and bring the topic back again. "Yes," Shirley responded softly. Maybe it was because she had finished venting after those words just now, but now she regained her senses after hearing this again. Although she is very annoying, her academic performance is very good, and Ibrahimovic has also been trained to be strong. There are not many elf in the school who can defeat her. "You're not bad either, you just lack a little know-how," Xiu encouraged casually. But in fact, when Xiu was chatting with Yuto before, he heard him teasing his sister's grades many times, and he didn't do his homework, and he didn't take Vulpix to exercise on weekdays. Now it seems that it's no wonder she can't beat that Chanel. "The trick?" Shirley looked at Xiu curiously. "Yeah, the trick," Xiu nodded to confirm, "as long as you do what I say, I can let you defeat her." Shirley seemed a little excited when she heard this and couldn't wait to urge, "Say it quickly. Say it quickly." First. It was getting dark. Yuto, who had returned from walking his dog, found that no one was in the living room when he returned home. Shirley, who used to like watching TV after school, was not there. Where did Shirley go? Yuto turned to look at the dog next to him. And the Groliath seemed to understand what he said, turned around and ran out of the house, running very fast. Seeing this, Yuto could only follow. Then he saw Xiu and Shirley sitting on the grass in the backyard and talking about something. The two seemed very casual, and there were some snacks on the ground. "What are you talking about?" Yuto walked over curiously. Xiu didn't feel strange to see Yuto, because Groliath had come first and was running happily in the yard. "We are talking about Vulpix," Xiu said, pushing away the snacks, and moved aside to make room for Yuto. Yuto seemed a little surprised, his eyes flickered back and forth between Xiu and Shirley, and he sat down after a while. When did his sister become interested in this? She was usually a lazy dog who didn't even want to do homework. Xiu didn't say anything nonsense, but continued the previous topic and pulled Yuto in. Xiu didn't understand Vulpix very well, after all, he had never come into contact with this kind of Pokemon, so he could only discuss it based on some basic aspects of cultivation. Yuto's intelligence is not bad, especially since Grolithe is also a fire type, and his understanding of Vulpix is even more thorough than that of Shiu, a layman. Shirley didn't have any feelings for Yuto at first, but was pulled in just by talking. For a while, a seminar on the cultivation method of Vulpix was launched.